Hello and welcome back to Magnetic Masculinity Podcast, where we provide men with practical tools and strategies to bridge the gap between achievement and fulfillment so that they can live their most magnetic lives. Today, we're talking about thoughts. And before we get into this episode, one thing that I want to mention, anybody who might be interested to hear one of our previous episodes where we touched on this, you can check the episode 7 where we talked about power of thought. Today,
the power of thought. Oh, yes,
Yeah.
That's right. The power of thought.
And today we continue, or we might go a bit deeper into this topic. But before we do that, maybe we can start with defining what thoughts are and what is their influence on our reality.
Oh, good question. Okay, welcome back. I love thoughts. Thoughts are one of my favorite topics. So I have many thoughts on thoughts that I will share. And maybe some of them are helpful to your journey. I used to do a webinar or a seminar, a corporate seminar to companies that say how the power of thought can bring your stress level from a 300 to a 30 instantly. And I stand by that. I often say, I probably heard it somewhere once, so I don't know who to give credit to for it, but that the difference between heaven and hell can be one shift of perspective. So what are thoughts? We could probably get lots of different experts in many amazing fields of science and philosophy or mysticism, and but we will simplify for the sake of metaphorical alignment and say that there are different types of thoughts. There might be thoughts in the collective, which is sort of like collective thoughts. This is a consensus reality. So again, if you're a computer, your computer can be plugged in and running, but you are still connected to the World Wide Web, that the spiritualists would call the Akashic Records, or more modern theories of consciousness and physics would call the database or the ether. So there can be collective thoughts that aren't even yours. There can be automatic thoughts. There can be nonsense thoughts. There can be fear thoughts. So what's more important when we're looking at thoughts is A, the awareness of them, and B, are they helpful or are they unhelpful? Is there valuable information in them, or is it like a pop-up on our web browser that we just shouldn't bother clicking on? As we've said before, it's commonly said in self-help that 90 to 95% of our perceptual awareness is subconscious. That's the thoughts we think, the words we speak, the habits we create, and the patterns we experience. So a lot of the thoughts that we think are not even your thoughts. They are just programs that were put into that computer, software, programs, pop-ups, algorithms that were put into that computer before the age of 7-ish. Some people say 5, some people say 9. I'll just say 7. So before the age of 5 to 8, or wherever they decide in that, I've heard different numbers, when our brain is in a theta state, it's like when we're that computer we have in our vehicle of consciousness is just blank, and people are installing all of the software, all of the hardware, all of the firmware, and so a lot of the thoughts we think might not even be authentically aligned for us. A lot of them might be repetitive, addictive thoughts. And the thing about thoughts is they're sort of a bit like a train. They start like chug, chug, chug out the station, but once they build up momentum, they're a little bit harder to stop. So, and the thoughts that we think over and over become beliefs. And beliefs become perceptual filters, which is how we see the world. So if we think a thought over and over, like, I'm a burden, I'm a burden, I'm a burden. Oh, my parent, in childhood, your parents were upset all the time and we're very self-centered in childhood, which is not a bad thing. It's just how our brains are, and our parents are upset all the time and we decide it's because I'm a burden. Or we hear them arguing about money. I'm a burden. And you think that thought, I'm a burden, because your brain just makes up, your computer just makes a reason because it likes to fill in blanks. The brain doesn't like to not know things. So if it doesn't know things, it just fills in blanks. That's why if you have 8 people at a car accident or something, they'll all report something completely different is happening. So it's fair to say that our brain does just fill in blanks for us. So the brain in childhood fills in blanks, thinks thoughts like, I'm a burden, I'm not good enough, nobody likes me, whatever it is. And that, again, those thoughts we think over and over start to create neural pathways. Those become beliefs. The brain must find evidence of what it believes. So then anything that we're viewing in the external reality, we take in through the perceptual filters created by these repetitive thoughts. So then even if something very neutral happens over here, and we take that in through our perceptual filters, our brain will find evidence that we are a burden. So it's very helpful to start to cultivate what's called metacognition, which is awareness of our thoughts, because we either believe a thought, and any thought we believe becomes a part of our reality. And any thought you believe, your brain or your nervous system will create a sort of chemical reaction to give you the physical sensation of that thought or belief. For instance, nobody cares about me, or I'm a burden. If we believe that thought, think about how that feels in your body, or what happens in your brain if you think I'm a burden. Chemical reaction kicks in, boom, and you feel like that, whether it's true or not. They often say that most of our thoughts, I read once, and I don't know how to verify the scientific accuracy of that, but something about 70% of our thoughts are nonsense thoughts, I call them. And I noticed from a very young age in childhood that most of my suffering was caused by untrue thoughts. So again, metacognition is the ability to be aware of our thoughts and to be sort of more of the observer, like we talked a little bit about in mindfulness and meditation episode, where we want to not just be strapped in the back of the vehicle of consciousness while the vehicle auto drives us down crazy town road. We want to become the pilot. And that metacognition is that zoomed out ability to be aware of our thought and decide if that thought is helpful or unhelpful, true or untrue. Like, oh, look at that person cutting me off in traffic. They must be such and such, and just sort of saying, who does that belong to? Like, that sounds like my dad, or that sounds like my mom, or, that's not even me. That's just programming. Is this helpful programming or unhelpful programming? And that metacognition starts to give us the ability to question our thoughts. And it doesn't mean we want to try to control our thoughts. Thoughts are not meant to be controlled. It's just, again, more about the observer. So you want to be watching what pops up on the screen in your computer, and you want to be able to decide what to click on and what not to click on. We also have intrusive thoughts, which are one of my favorite types of thoughts. Intrusive thoughts are like one of our parts in our subconscious or our conscious that throws an idea out there. But often these parts are like 5-year-olds or 7-year-olds, or like, I had a client who told me a couple of weeks ago he thought he was a terrible person because he was driving and somebody cut him off, and they ended up at a stoplight, and he was like, I hope he goes through that stoplight and gets smushed. And I was like, do you really mean, did you really want him to get smushed? He's like, no. But does that mean like I'm a terrible person, or that I'm like a murderer? I'm like, no, if you didn't act on the thought, like just because it pops up on your web browser, doesn't mean you have to click on it. Just look at it and go, haha, you can laugh at it and go, that's a nonsense thought, or that's an intrusive thought. Is that thought helpful? Because again, you either question a thought or you believe a thought. And the thoughts you believe become your reality and how you experience your reality. And all of those systems in the vehicle of consciousness respond to those thoughts. So again, the first step is metacognition, or awareness of the thoughts. And then you can consciously create new beliefs, new thoughts. You can, there are ways through mindfulness and meditation that you can reduce the number of thoughts you have. And again, thoughts are one of the ways that we can utilize becoming the programmer of our computer, rather than just having this old outdated computer that you did not install the software in, generating how you create your reality. Like I always say, it's not your fault that you think those thoughts. It's not, but it might not be optimal. Does that make sense? That was a lot. I kind of went around the different topics there.
Okay, so I have quite a few questions here. So with the thoughts, you mentioned identifying whether they're your authentic thoughts, or they're just nonsense thoughts, or they're somebody else's thoughts.
Yeah.
How can you know which thoughts are they? How can you know which ones are actually your thoughts versus somebody else's?
Well, that's a great question.
Especially because if the programming happens in such a young age, then decades later it's still there. So now they're all kind of,
Yeah.
it feels like it's my thought.
So there's a process that I have of reframing thoughts. We could maybe link that below, or if somebody does a discovery call with me, you can ask me for that particular tool that helps walk people through this. But let's say you have a thought like, rich people are, a lot of my clients are very wealthy, but say you have a thought like, rich people are selfish. They are the problem with the world. Might have been something your dad said growing up. You overheard your dad say, oh, you can't trust rich people or whatever. So then you hear that over and over, you think that thought, and just like hearing a song on a radio, eventually it just goes boop, and it just becomes like very entrenched in your brain. But you don't know that that's not your thought. So if you start thinking, oh, wealthy people are selfish, or people with money are greedy or whatever, you can stop and say, is that true? And your brain's going to go, yes, it's totally true, because the brain likes to justify its beliefs. But then you could say, what's an opposite thought that could be true? So you challenge it from an opposite side and you go, what else could be true? Does that thought make me feel good? Does that thought make me feel lousy? Does that thought make me feel energized? Or does that thought make me feel drained? Now, I would like to point out that there's a caveat to this. We don't always want to avoid or challenge thoughts that make us feel comfortable. Let's talk about shadow work or shit sandwiches. Sometimes a thought like, hey, maybe I am the problem in my family. Maybe I am emotionally invalidating my wife. Or maybe I am bullying people at work. Or maybe I am dopamine addicted or whatever. Those thoughts are going to make us feel kind of crappy. But again, we're going to biohack that system by going, oh, I just ate a shit sandwich. That's amazing. That's how you level up. That is how you level up, is you go through that discomfort and you prioritize your expansion and self-awareness over protecting your ego. So when I say this, that if a thought makes you feel lousy, it's probably not true, I want to point that fine line or that balance out, that sometimes crappy thoughts are the true thoughts. But it's more just about being curious and being an awareness and just asking yourself, is this helpful or unhelpful? Who does this thought belong to? That's something very simple. You don't have to go into like super hyper analyzing every thought, because that's going to create more thoughts and that might cause more of a monkey mind. It's just more being aware and just becoming the observer, zooming out. So you're back here and you're watching the thoughts and letting them flow by and choosing which one is going to be really helpful and empowering, or reframing a thought. Let's use an example. So I have a client who's going through a very upsetting divorce. And he feels that his parents have not been supportive of him in this divorce, and they've been choosing sides of his wife. And what he's decided is that my parents don't care about me. Now, think about the thought, my parents don't care about me. If you believe that thought, that's going to be painful. And if you think that thought over and over and over, that's going to become a belief. And then it doesn't matter how many things your parents do to show you that they care about you, your brain will only find evidence of what it believes. This happens a lot in marriages when I do couples coaching. I see this a lot. This can really impact people's quality of life. Now, we don't want to invalidate that what he's experiencing is suboptimal and that I wish his parents were showing up for him in a different way. But we can change the thought, my parents don't care about me. My parents are sabotaging me. My parents are choosing her. We can shift those thoughts in this case to, my parents love me. And they are very emotionally unskillful. And I wish that they could meet me at a different level. And the way my parents know how to solve problems is by throwing money at things. So again, we're sort of shifting our thoughts. We're not going from zero to hero. We're not invalidating or gaslighting ourselves. but we're finding different thoughts like that feel like such a relief in the body. Like think about the thought of my parents don't love me, my parents are sabotaging me, which in some cases it could be true. So then we would use a different tool. But in this case, it's more like my parents love me a lot and they are really emotionally unskillful and they're very conflict adverse. And the only way they know how to show me they love me is by throwing money at things, when what I really want is to be told everything's going to be okay. So you see, I had a partner once who had a belief that nobody appreciates him. So he thought that thought over and over and over because in some ways people didn't appreciate him. So the initial programming in that case was pretty accurate. But again, the thoughts we think over and over become beliefs, and beliefs become perceptual filters, how we view reality. It's like rose-colored glasses, but maybe there's like poop-colored glasses. Maybe there's like 10, 20 layers of those. And everything that happens in our external reality has to come through those perceptual filters, aka beliefs and thoughts. So something that I noticed, and in this line of work, I was able to work with it, but I could see how it would be very traumatizing if I didn't have this awareness myself, is that it didn't matter how many things I did to show him how much I appreciated him. And I genuinely did. I would say it, I would do acts of service, I would cover all the love languages, but it didn't matter. His brain would only find evidence. It would take one piece of information, twist it around to say, see, you don't appreciate me. So it can really not only make your own life less fun if you have a lot of these beliefs and perceptual filters and repetitive negative thoughts. Ants, they call them sometimes, automatic negative thoughts. I think that's funny, like you have a little brain full of ants, all these little automatic negative thoughts, that most of which aren't even yours. But it also can impact others negatively because, again, for me, it was like I was I was not only not getting validation, appreciation, and praise or closeness or connection for the things I was doing. It's like I was always being punished for a crime I didn't even commit. So we have, not only accountability for our own happiness, but accountability to how we're showing up with others if we don't develop this metacognition, again, which is the ability to be aware of our thoughts and not try to control them or manage them, or, it's not to, thoughts can be very helpful too. Like I've done a lot of different styles of meditation. I've been in what people might call thoughtless states, or bliss states or samadhi states. I've sustained them for months at a time and really gone deep into thinking about thoughts. I've literally spent weeks just pondering thoughts over my life and how much they can impact me. And I think that controlling thoughts is not helpful, but observing them is helpful. So again, think of them like pop-ups on the browser in your computer and choosing whether they're helpful for you to click on or not. And not judging them, not having to know where they came from. You don't have to overthink the thoughts. You just want to start being aware of them, or just letting them pass by, just letting them happen. But again, if you can either let them float by, or you can choose different thoughts, or you can challenge them. But what you don't want to do is just have all that software running and you're just believing it all the time without questioning it, because most of those thoughts are based on nonsense programming and they're untrue. Or they might not have anything to do with your authentic alignment, because your programming, given that we're in the emotional dark ages, was probably not optimized to your unique magnetic masculinity blueprint and your authentic alignment. They were just reflections of what your church, society, parents, brother, sister, neighbor, church group, whatever television show you liked, whatever those things thought in childhood. So again, it's becoming the programmer or the observer, rather than just feeling like you're strapped in the back of that vehicle of consciousness and you have no control over your life, or you're stuck with monkey mind or repetitive thoughts or negative thoughts, or you're behaving in your less adorable ways of behaving because you're believing untrue thoughts. And I would even say most suffering on this planet is based on, the root is unquestioned thoughts.
What if those thoughts are based in truth? Meaning, what if somebody thinks that they're a failure and they have failed a lot of times, and through those external experiences, they get to that conclusion or thought that they're a failure. What to do when they actually have external proof that they could use that
Yeah.
I am a failure?
Yeah. Okay. So like, well, first we would have to define, that's such a good question. That's such a good question. I love it. So let's think of the thought, I am a failure. First, we'd have to decide how to define failure. And it's true. When you're questioning a thought, I have a whole Socratic, it's called a Socratic questioning. So I do have a whole form of how to do Socratic questioning, inquisitive questioning of your thoughts, challenging them, choosing thoughts that are more helpful, like in the example I gave. And we can give a couple more examples before we close out, because I think that's just a very easy way to, I'll tell a couple of client stories. But one of the ways we can do is ask others. So we can ask others, do you think I'm a failure? But now most people are so disingenuous on the planet, and they prioritize not hurting people's feelings over the truth because we don't know how to eat a shit sandwich. They'll probably be like, no, you're not. But you could come ask somebody like me, and I would tell you very much the truth, because I prioritize the truth over protecting the ego. But in that case, I would use a slightly different tool. Remember that spiritual mastery or or evolutionary mastery is discernment to know which tool to use when. So then if you are experiencing a lot of failure, we would want to install that self-compassion, and we would want to eat a shit sandwich and go, yeah, I'm failing, and that doesn't feel good anymore. So I'm going to choose to do things differently. And what suboptimal programming am I running that's perpetuating me to experience this experience of failing that things over and over? So which system in my vehicle of consciousness, needs a little tune-up or a little optimization so that we're being accountable rather than shame collapsing? And saying, so what if I am a failure right now? What am I making it? Okay, so say I'm failing at work. Okay, maybe you're failing at work because you have a limiting belief. Maybe you're failing at work because what you're trying to do, you suck at. Maybe you're failing because you were exhausted because you're not nourishing your body correctly and you have no serotonin in your gut. Maybe you're failing because your father told you in childhood that you'd never amount to anything, and you thought that thought over and over, and that thought became a belief, and that belief became a perceptual filter. So it's about being curious and compassionate and taking power and control over that vehicle of consciousness and piloting it effectively and applying these tools and knowing when to use which tool is just sort of discernment or mastery that you cultivate over time, and typically a lot of failures to get there.
So a follow-up question to this, a bit different scenario. So in this case, it was more so kind of internally created or came up based on external. But what if there's somebody who externally is always like reinforcing that thought, or they might even be like saying that thought of, I don't know, as an example, could be wife saying that they're not enough or they're not doing something enough or whatever.
Yeah.
What to do in that kind of situation where you have somebody externally, especially if it's somebody close to you, kind of reinforcing or feeding that thought?
Yeah, that's not helpful for sure. And if you have a partner that's constantly telling you you're not good enough, you might want to seek couples counseling or couples coaching, or you might want to analyze if that relationship is a healthy relationship for you or not. And also, if you are in a relationship like that, not all the time, but sometimes that can be an indicator that you somehow mirror that belief, because we often attract in partners what we really truly subconsciously believe in ourselves. It's shame can wear different jackets. Shame can look like self-sacrifice and giving and giving and giving and giving and martyring ourselves, or shame can look like deflection. You're the problem, you're the problem, you're the problem. It can be lashing out or lashing in. So even if you get an abusive dynamic where one person is lashing out and the other person is trying to fix them and trying to and taking it, and they're both the self-concept underneath is shame. So they have different jackets, but energetically it's the same. So why am I choosing relationships where people reflect to me that I am a failure? Or another Another strategy would be looking at that relationship and seeing that the person reflecting that to you themselves is in pain, and looking if you are meeting their needs. So again, there's not a one answer for every scenario. Human beings are a little more complex than that, which is why some people like to hire a life strategist like me, because there can be 5 or 6 different factors to any different experience. And it would be harder to install new software if somebody else was reflecting that to you. But at the end of the day, if somebody says something to you and you don't have a wound there, it means that they're being obnoxious or hurt or triggered. But if you don't believe it, it's not going to hurt you that much. But if somebody says you're a failure and you have a wound there, you're going to go, oh. So you might be attracting people in the universe to poke your wounds so that you know where to do the healing, because now you have awareness of where your wounds are. If somebody tells me I'm a failure, I'm going to be like, oh, tell me why you think that. Like, I'm not going to be triggered by it because I'm not a failure. Do I fail at things? Constantly. Oh my gosh. I fail at things constantly. Yeah, but I don't mind. Now, I used to have a paralyzing fear of failure because I thought I wasn't good enough. I had thoughts like, I'm not good enough. I'm unlovable. Nothing I do is right. I have to be better. I'm not good enough. But now that I don't have that subconscious software, I'd be very curious if somebody was like, you're a failure. I'd be like, great. Is there some advice you can give me for life optimization? Or are they just projecting something within them? So if somebody else is, one of my favorite tools in spiritual growth or life growth is asking yourself, am I using my words as medicine or poison? Words are very powerful. So we want to be conscientious of the words that we are serving to others. If you constantly get people being rude to you, might be a reflection that you're rude to others and you have some shit sandwiches to eat. But it doesn't matter if somebody else is, or sometimes somebody else themselves is filled with poison. And if they're serving you poison because that's what their thoughts are thinking, you don't have to drink the poison. And the antidote to poison is medicine. It doesn't mean you accept abuse. Doesn't mean you don't have boundaries. You absolutely don't accept abuse and you do have boundaries. But it just more puts us in this metacognition or this analyzing and compassionate state of curiosity where we're like, what does that mean? And again, if something stings, it means you might have a belief there, which is very helpful. So if somebody comes up to you and pokes you and you go, ouch, well, now you know where the wound is and you can go heal it. So eventually over time, you become more trigger proof if you are also healing the wounds, which is a different episode than this one, which is about thoughts. But does that answer your question? And so I wish I could give you a more simple answer, but giving one answer to a question like that would not be serving our clients in understanding that this is a multidimensional reality. So it's not a one size fits all. There's not one tool for every job. You don't go build a house and bring a hammer, You look at, what tool is best for this job? Why is the structural integrity compromised of this wall? Why, it's the same thing. It's about being curious. It's hoping that you can release any emotions and then you come into clarity and connection and curiosity.
And you also mentioned about the train thoughts that a lot of times the thoughts are put in that train early on, and the longer it is going and the harder it's kind of to change them. What would you say to somebody who is listening to this and might be like, I've been having this for decades. Like, there's no way how I can, kind of having that sense of maybe hopelessness towards it.
Yeah. The great news is it doesn't matter how long you've been practicing a thought, and it doesn't matter how deeply entrenched that neural pathway is. Like electricity likes to take the path of least resistance. So if you have that nicely carved neural pathway, it's going to be natural that the train tries to take that track. So in that case, it might take a little more effort or just the right tool. Some people, though, I'd say just be curious. Some people, I've worked with clients where in one or two sessions, we've completely turned around a thought pattern or source of suffering that they've been practicing for decades. And with some people, it takes a couple of months. There's no wrong way to heal. But you absolutely can. It's just software. Now, if you're really trying to change a lot of brain states, you would probably also want to make sure that you're that you are having as much of a clear signal as you can, that you have the optimal nutrition for your brain, and that you have the units of energy to reprogram those thoughts. So if you have no units of energy and your gas tank is empty and the heart battery isn't charged, remember, all those things feed into each other. So the more your battery is charged, maybe sometimes those thoughts go away by themselves. Maybe the more your emotional navigation system is in tune, the less those thoughts happen. Another thing that I've observed in my life is after I've had antibiotics or when I eat gluten, my thoughts change. Because thoughts can also have, thoughts we think create the emotions we feel, but sometimes the emotions we feel can trigger thoughts. So it becomes like a feedback loop, and it's like chicken, egg, chicken, egg, chicken, egg. But often it's usually the thoughts we think. So if I think my husband doesn't care about me, which I know is not true, then, that triggers a horrible feeling in my body. But the brain goes, okay, that's a fact. It just thinks it's a fact. And it's like, okay, we need 2 parts cortisol, 1 part adrenaline, and norepinephrine. I don't know. I just made that up. And insert that, and then that goes through into our vehicle of consciousness, and we experience that as an emotion. But sometimes, for instance, if you've had antibiotics, like I had a few months ago, and all of a sudden my thoughts got really unpleasant, and I realized I had no serotonin in my gut. So when you have no serotonin, your body feels hopeless, or your body feels cortisol, or your body feels dread, or the absence of the happy chemical, then it can trigger thoughts because the brain starts trying to make up reasons why that's happening. Why is it happening? Is it because of this? Is it because, and the brain is the meaning maker, right? So it wants to make meaning out of everything. Whereas once I became aware of it and learned that, I was like, oh, I am having a chemical deficiency or a chemical malfunction in my avatar where I am low on serotonin because my gut microbiome has been wiped out. So then my brain didn't have to make it mean anything. I just sort of allowed it to happen, and it didn't trigger this feedback loop. But they can be, again, it can be chicken. One can be the chicken, one can be the egg, but typically it's thought, emotion, and then those become a feedback loop, and they just start going woo, 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 woo. And the more you think that thought, the more you feel that emotion, the more you think that thought. And when we can, this is why one of the reasons why I love a morning gratitude practice, even though it's a bit cliche, it works. You wake up in the morning, that software kicks in, you start thinking the same thoughts you thought the day before. You start having the same fears you have the day before. You start doing the same things. But if you wake up and you consciously, start installing software or deciding which program or which part of the World Wide Web you want to click your browser on, you're going to have an easier time. And if you practice metacognition and Socratic questioning over time, you're going to be able to catch that train when it's just starting to chugga out of the station rather than it's barreling along. And then it is sometimes a little bit harder to stop. So you can catch a thought. I'm trying to think if I have an example in my own life. If I can catch a thought, if I can catch a thought quite early on, it just requires less. It just requires less programming or reprogramming or observation, or I can just laugh at a thought and go, that's a nonsense thought. Like I'll think, my husband didn't give me half the mango, so he doesn't care about me, or some stupid thought. And I'll be like, that is a nonsense thought. And I'm not like mean to myself. I just kind of giggle. I'm like, is that true? Because I could find 700,000 million trillion pieces of evidence that my husband cares about me. But if I start believing an untrue thought, he doesn't care about me, I'm going to start getting bitchy or agitated or whatever my coping mechanisms are. And I'm going to start pouting or sulking or, projecting or defending or whatever, everybody has their patterns. So we also have an accountability, like I said, to others to start questioning our thoughts a little bit.
What to do if you only know negative thoughts, or you might even be like not addicted, well, maybe even addicted
you can be
to
addicted
negative
to
thoughts.
them. You can be addicted to them.
Like
because they
what
still
to do
give
then?
you like juice, right? If you also remember that the brain prioritizes what is familiar. So people that are very used to feeling anxious, sad, angry, bitter, defensive, jealous, whatever they are, that becomes familiar. That's where their neural pathways are. Plus, the ego gets a lot of juice from those, which I'm not condemning the ego. We all have an ego. Egos can be very helpful, but like anything, they can be a helpful, supportive team member. or they can be really, when they're out of control, they can be very unhelpful. So we're not judging the ego. But when we're in that hostile takeover where one of our parts has grabbed hold of the talking stick and is thinking negative thoughts and has been practicing those negative thoughts, and we're addicted to those negative thoughts, it can feel very unfamiliar to think different thoughts. And what is unfamiliar to us as human beings is often uncomfortable. And then that discomfort pushes us back to our safety zone. So an extreme version of this is a story I share with a lot of compassion that I almost adopted. I used to volunteer a lot with very traumatized youth. And one particular youth had had a horrific upbringing, had experienced a lot of pain, had been sold into the sex trade industry and been forced to become addicted to drugs. And when I was working with this youth, before they turned 18, I offered to take them into my home from a center they had been living in. And I loved them very much and had no agenda, but it felt so unfamiliar to them to be loved that the day they were supposed to move in, even though they had been clean and sober for 11 months, they jumped on a train, went downtown, went back to their pimp, and shot up drugs. And that's a very extreme version of this. But I share that story to remind people that what is comfortable for you is not always what's in your best interest. But be aware your brain isn't trying to sabotage you, but your brain and your subconscious parts often prioritize what is familiar to them, because there's this sort of wiring of safety and familiarity. So it's just something to be aware of, so that if we are asking ourselves, am I addicted to this thought form, or am I just too tired to create new neural pathways because I don't have enough units of energy and my poor brain is overheating and I haven't had enough glucose and I'm dehydrated. So again, there can be lots of different inputs to any particular output. So I like to look at things from a really multidimensional level.
And even like in this case, let's say becoming aware of those negative thoughts, how to deal with now wanting to beat yourself up or having another layer of negative thoughts about those negative thoughts, pretty much.
Yeah, that's a good one. And we'll talk a little bit about this in our manifestation, law of attraction, or law of mirroring episode, but that's very normal. So first of all, if you catch yourself beating yourself up about your negative thoughts or being afraid of your negative thoughts, a lot of people listen to like the law of attraction, for instance, and then they're afraid of their thoughts. They're like, oh, I thought this negative thought about my husband. Now I'm worried it's going to happen to him, because we forget that everybody else also has free will and they also have their own computer, and that the universe is not so dim-witted that it's like, oh, you didn't want your husband to get hit by a car today? Oh, sorry, you thought that, so I made that happen to him. So it's also a little bit about like, yes, our thoughts have a lot of power, but so does everybody else's. That part of you, the inner judger or the inner critic, we can work with that using parts work. Just say, this is very normal. It's very typical. That's okay. Is it helpful? Probably not. So then you want to lean into your self-compassion and you want to lean into your parts work and just say, it's very normal to have negative thoughts about my negative thoughts or beat myself up for thinking thoughts. But every time you notice that, go back to our episode about awareness, you celebrate the awareness. You go, I'm in awareness. That instantly shifts that thought, right? From like, I'm failing, I'm doing a stupid job, I shouldn't do this, to I am in awareness. I love the feeling of awareness.
Yeah.
Because if it's below the level of your awareness, it's within the subconscious, you can't do anything about it. But as soon as it's in your awareness, you can just observe it, go, perfect, great. That's sometimes all you need. Yeah. And compassion, awareness and compassion. And then making a conscious choice to do it differently over and over and over again, or just letting that thought float by. Or maybe taking a break and going and doing a quick mindfulness or meditation. Or you can try to get deep into the subconscious through hypnosis, self-hypnosis, guided meditation, same thing. I did master hypnotherapy training, but it's it's basically just getting your brain into a state where you can more quickly and easily reprogram some of the software. If you think about creating a neural pathway, think of it like a big wild field that has never been mowed. You can either walk through that field a zillion times until eventually it'll create a path, or you can take a lawnmower and go through that field, and then there's going to be a new neural pathway. So that's one of the reasons that people like getting their brains in certain states when they reprogram some of those thoughts. But also just remembering that awareness is 90% of the battle. So anytime you're in awareness, celebrate it. You're in metacognition, you're in the driver's seat then.
Yeah, and episode 8 is awareness, and episode 9 self-compassion, if anybody wants to go back and listen to those.
Great.
Anything else you want to add on thoughts?
I think we'll end with a little story, because I think that those are very helpful to help us understand. So I'm going to use an example of a client I worked with who's a very successful real estate developer, owned a couple of companies. And when he came to me, he was very stressed. He was drinking more than usual. He was eating unhealthy comfort foods that he used to self-soothe. He was getting snippy with his family. His children didn't really want to engage with him. His wife was disappointed all the time. And people didn't want to work for him very much anymore. And he was also experiencing severe back pains and hypertension and all kinds of things. So somebody had referred him to me. And when I asked him what the problem was, what all those were symptoms of, he said he had a building that cost millions of dollars, that was burning through tens of thousands of dollars a month, and he hadn't been able to sell it. And I was like, yeah, I could see that would be very stressful. Absolutely. And this is where we're going to bring a stress level from 400 to a 40 right here. And I said, what I'd like you to do for the first week is really practice this metacognition. And I gave him some Socratic questioning. I gave him some tools to practice metacognition and start training awareness. I said, I want you to write down most of the thoughts that you're thinking. And he's like, you're supposed to be really good at this. I told you what the problem was. The problem aren't my thoughts. It's millions of dollars, and it's cost me however much per month, and it's been this long, and this person, and this thing is going down, and this machine needs fixing, and that, and I was like, that's great. I really want you to just do this, and you don't have to pay me if it doesn't work. So he came back a week later, and the thoughts he was thinking, and one thought he said he probably was thinking 100 to 200 times per day, was, I am effing ruined. This is a nightmare. I have ruined my life. I am a failure. My family is embarrassed of me. I've embarrassed my family. My father would be ashamed of me. I'm going to end up broke. So we can look at having a building that's tying up millions of dollars and burning through tens of thousands of dollars a month, and 2 companies that are failing and not having the right employees and not being able to fill contracts is very stressful. There's no denying. We're not going to gaslight that. I'm going to just hypothetically call that 40 units of stress. But what very quickly took that 40 units of stress to a 400 is thoughts like, I'm ruined. I'm going to be broke. My family is ashamed of me. This is a nightmare. If you tell your brain this is a nightmare, your brain says, okay, this is a nightmare. Insert these chemical reactions, insert these chemical reactions. And if you think my family is ruined, I'm going to be broke, oh, cortisol, adrenaline, your thoughts are your body is responding as if those thoughts are true. And then how much energy do you think that took? So of course he was drinking. Of course he was experiencing all of those things. And it doesn't mean that we start thinking like toxic positivity, like everything is amazing. This is exactly what I want. But we started every 15 minutes having him pause and say things like, this has been really stressful, but I've made it through 100% of stressful situations I've been in my life. I'm the kind of man who can start several companies and buy millions of dollars in property. My family loves me. I'm excited for somebody to buy this building so that they can create their dream company. How could I market this building differently? We also did some shit sandwich eating of how he was showing up in his life with a lot of self-compassion and up-leveling. But just shifting those thoughts alone created so much freedom and relief and stopped using so much energy that more creative problem solving, more creative thoughts came up. His helpful thoughts came in, his higher self thoughts came in, his intuition kicked in. And he started practicing more self-compassion. And then how quickly do you think that building sold? Right? So it's looking at how our thoughts, our body, our brain believes our thoughts. We're supposed to be piloting this vehicle of consciousness. But again, if it's all running with old software, that computer's running old software and we have no control over it and we have no ability to reprogram it and we're just believing everything we think, then not only are we going to be less fun to others to be with, less present and less able to really make other people feel seen and heard, but we're going to be in reactivity mode. We're going to be running on subconscious programs and you're not actually piloting that vehicle of consciousness at all. So the power of your thoughts is amazing, again, which is not about controlling your thoughts, which is not about emptying your mind of thoughts. It's just about starting to practice metacognition or awareness and observing those thoughts and deciding, is this thought going to be helpful or not? Should I act on this thought or not act on this thought? I have clients who have occasionally told me, like, I had a really negative, like a really bad thought. And I'm like, did you act on it? All right, well, no. I'm like, great. Then you're a good person. It was just, thoughts are just things. They're just things. It's only the thoughts that we believe are the thoughts that we act on that become a part of reality. Just think of it like a buffet, or like a zillion pop-ups. You just choose which ones you click on. You're still going to get the odd pop-up for like, I don't know. I get weird pop-ups or weird ads on my phone or on my computer all the time. I just don't click on them. I just look at them and go, no, I don't think that fits me. Or literally, I laugh at my nonsense thoughts. And I'm like, that is a nonsense thought. My husband and I have nonsense thoughts all the time. We call each other out on it. Or my old assistant used to come into my office and be like, Sandy, can I tell you something? Because we like to create an inhospitable environment for shame by being open about things. She'd be like, I had a really intrusive thought. I'd be like, great, tell me. She'd be like, I had this intrusive thought about my ex-boyfriend and what I would like to happen to him or whatever. And I'm like, great. Did you act on it? She's like, no. I'm like, great, you're fine. Because we also can have a lot of shame about our thoughts, or we can fear our own thoughts or suppress our own thoughts. And what we resist persists. So we'll get more into that in our episode about law of mirroring, law of attraction, or that magnetic energy, where when you're in that flow state and your thoughts, the computer and the heart battery and the emotional navigation system and the energy in the engine and the gas in the engine, when everything is online and working together, you become magnetic and people, places, opportunities flow to you like you're a magnet, right? We're always attracting things. So why not attract things that are really fun and authentically aligned for us? And part of that puzzle is just becoming aware of our thoughts and dismissing, letting them float by, or reprogramming thoughts that don't serve us. And if they're really repetitive and they come up over and over, there's probably just a belief or a perceptual filter, and we can wipe that little poop colored lens off and we can see life more clearly.
Yeah.
Or bring our stress level from a 400 to a 40 instantly using the power of thought. One shift of perspective can be the difference between heaven and hell. Like I said, if I think a thought like my husband doesn't care about me or my husband doesn't prioritize me, not only am I going to show up in a more obnoxious way in his life, but that actually, even saying that physically makes me feel uncomfortable. But saying my husband loves me and adores me and cherishes me and appreciates me and does things for me and I love him and I adore him and I appreciate him creates sort of like, I want that train getting out of the station, because no different than the dark train getting out of the station, when we practice gratitude and appreciation and consciously focusing on what we want more of and focusing on what kind of train we want to go where, the great news is that train's going to build up momentum and you're going to get addicted to that. I'm in gratitude and appreciation probably 80% of the time. That train is it's reprogrammed software. So it's almost hard to stop at this point, the same as it used to be almost impossible for me to stop thoughts of like feeling like I literally remember the day that I thought maybe this last relationship I had failed. I think I'm the problem in all it. I mean, to some extent was true. I definitely have, we all bring our own shit to everything we go to. But I remember the thought was, I must be unlovable. I remember the day I had that thought, and I thought, yep, that's got to be the truth. And I physically crumbled to the ground from the weight of that thought. Now, am I unlovable? Like, I thought I was so fundamentally broken and flawed and useless and stupid and such a burden that I was literally unlovable by myself or others. And I was like, I should probably just be alone because I would never subject somebody else to being with me. That's a bullshit thought. But that thought almost killed me. So metacognition is our friend. And thoughts like, just thoughts of our inner critic, like, you're never good enough, you're not doing a good job, nobody likes you, whatever. I mean, which again, to your point, might be true. Maybe nobody likes you, but in that case, it's probably just a personality reprogramming that's needed, or some shit sandwiches to eat, which is not a problem either.
So that's thoughts. And as
There's
always,
lots of thoughts on thoughts.
yeah,
We gave lots of thoughts on thoughts, so you might want to listen to this twice because
and
that's a lot
and
of
also
information.
also feel free to share your thoughts on thoughts. You can comment below if you're watching on YouTube, and there's always a link in show notes where you can click and submit any questions or any comments or feedback, because we would love to hear your thoughts and your thoughts on thoughts as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Share any thoughts you have, or if you have intrusive thoughts or nonsense thoughts. And as always, if you're interested in pursuing a relationship and you are feeling like you want to work with a life strategist or work on your own personal magnetic masculinity blueprint, feel free to book a discovery session with me or a strategy session where we will map out your own unique magnetic masculinity blueprint. And then whether we decide to work together, great. And if you decide to work with somebody else, great. And if you decide to work on those things on your own, great. Because one of our missions together here at the Magnetic Masculinity Movement is to reach 1 million men and hopefully lots more, and help humanity heal out of the emotional dark ages and empower men to step into their most magnetic lives.
And speaking on most magnetic lives, a lot of times our fears and beliefs can get in a way, and that's the topic of next week that we will be talking about.
Great. I will see you next week. Thanks for tuning in. Bye for now.